Hello, boys and girls, and welcome back to another Greek myth. Today's Greek myth is called Demeter and Persephone. So last week we read about Prometheus and Pandora. I just want to remind you of some of the characteristics of Greek mythology, that they are fictional stories, once thought to be true, that tried to explain things in nature, or taught a moral, or also known as a lesson. So Demeter is one of the goddesses that we heard in our very first story, the 12 gods and goddesses of Mount Olympus. And her daughter is Persephone. So the story is really about the two of them. Now, if Demeter is one of the goddesses from Mount Olympus, think for a moment, is she mortal or immortal? And hopefully you're remembering that she would be immortal, meaning that she does not die. Now today we also meet two other characters. We meet Hades, which is another one of Zeus's brothers that we did meet quickly in our very first story. And you're also going to meet another immortal known as Helios. Now, both Hades and Helios are immortals that do not live on Mount Olympus. And another character, too, that will come up is Cerberus. And you've maybe encountered Cerberus in other stories before. So let's listen and see if you can think about, while we're going through this myth, think about what in nature this story is trying to teach us. So this is Demeter and Persephone. As you have learned, the ancient Greeks believed that there were many gods and goddesses responsible for the workings of the world. There was Poseidon, who was the god of the sea, Ares, the god of war, and Aphrodite, the goddess of love, just to name a few. Demeter was the goddess of the harvest, and agriculture or farming. It was because of her that the ancient Greeks believed that fruits hung heavy on the trees, and wheat grew in the fields, and vegetables ripened on the ground. Demeter had a daughter named Persephone, who was the joy of her life. Persephone was known by all of the gods and goddesses on Mount Olympus as a beautiful girl, just like her mother, and like her mother was full of happiness, warmth, and light. As long as the two of them were together, it was summer year-round. Some days, Demeter would take Persephone with her to tend to the crops in the fields. On these days, Demeter would work among the crops, and Persephone would play in a nearby field of flowers, picking bouquets. One such day, Persephone strayed farther and farther away from her mother, until, humming a little tune, Persephone was far out of Demeter's sight. Now, Persephone was not just known by the gods and goddesses of Mount Olympus. Hades, Zeus's brother and the god of the underworld, had also taken notice of her. As god of the underworld, Hades lived underground and oversaw all of the souls of the dead. He and his three-headed dog, Cerberus, saw to it that none of the dead escaped back to the land of the living. Hades had fallen in love with Persephone, and the king of the underworld wanted to make her his queen. On that day, as Persephone drifted away from her mother, Hades harnessed his 4 black horses to his golden chariot. As Persephone bent to pick up one last flower, she could hear the faint sound of hooves beating. Persephone stood up and looked around, and as she did, Hades tore open the ground that separated the underworld from the land of the living and grabbed Persephone. He spirited her away, back to the underworld, in his chariot. Now, spirited means that he carried her off mysteriously or secretly. As the sun began to set, Demeter finally stopped her work in the fields. Persephone, she called out, ready to take her daughter home, but there was no answer. Thinking that perhaps Persephone had not heard her, she called out again. Persephone! Demeter heard nothing but the chirps of evening crickets, and then she began to worry. Demeter searched all night, calling for her daughter, but no matter where she looked or how loudly she called, she could not find Persephone. As the night wore on, Demeter began to look older. Wrinkles formed on her face and her body grew crooked, and she moved more and more slowly. By the time the sun came up the next day, Demeter was no longer full of happiness, warmth, and light, but was a bent old woman. In her night of searching, Demeter had not found Persephone, and so she turned to the sun god Helios, who during the day sees all, and asked for help. So think for a moment, how do you think Demeter is feeling at this time? Oh, Helios, Demeter said, have you seen my daughter? Persephone, do you know where she has gone? Hades has taken her down to the underworld to be his queen, Helios replied. Well, upon hearing this, Demeter began to despair. How was she to ever retrieve her daughter now? Demeter began to weep for her lost daughter, and in her sadness she forgot to tend to the crops in the fields. The grass began to turn brown, the wheat, it stopped growing, and soon there was no more food on the earth for the animals and the people to eat. Every tree, vine, and field was bare. Even the gods received no more offerings, for the people did not have any food or meat to spare. After some time, Zeus saw that the people would starve if something was not done. Only gods and goddesses could go to the underworld and then leave, so Zeus traveled to the underworld to persuade Hades to let Persephone go. Hades, he said, if you do not return Persephone to her mother Demeter, nothing will grow on the earth again, and the people will starve. I will gladly return her, Hades says, if she hasn't eaten anything. You know the rule, Zeus. Whoever eats of the food of the underworld or drinks of its water must stay forever. Zeus and Hades looked at Persephone, waiting for an answer. Had she eaten the food of the underworld? Persephone began to cry. I ate 6 pomegranate seeds, she said. A rule was a rule, but Zeus knew that if Persephone remained in the underworld, nothing would grow on the earth ever again. So he made a deal with Hades. For each seed that she has eaten, Persephone will stay 1 month in the underworld as your queen. But for the rest of the year, however, she will live on earth with her mother, Demeter. So I'm going to say that part again, boys and girls. For each seed she has eaten, Persephone will stay 1 month in the underworld as your queen. So she ate 6 seeds, they said. So how many months must she stay in the underworld? However, she will live on earth for the rest of the year with her mother, Demeter. So the other 6 months she will be with Demeter. And so it was that for 6 months of the year, Demeter and Persephone were happy together. Fruits, wheat, and other plants sprouted from the ground, and it was spring. As they grew bountifully, the world was bright and it was summer. During those 6 months that Persephone lived in the underworld, however, Demeter would ignore all the crops on the earth and would pine for her daughter. The leaves would fall off, the trees in autumn, and would be bare in winter. While Demeter longed for her daughter, once Persephone was returned to Demeter, it would be spring again. Now, I'm sure some of you are already thinking, oh, I know what this myth is trying to explain. And I can assure you that will be one of your questions in your classroom this week. Now, before I sign off, I want to show you something for you and your families that may be of help to you over the next couple days or weeks until we can be together again. This is our district's website that you are all familiar with. If you were to click on Library Chat, you will be brought to this page. To our emo library patrons, are you looking for instant answers in real time to navigate this distance learning world we find ourselves in? Your library is here to help. Thanks to our technology department, we will be debuting live chat on Monday, April 13th. Live chat will be available every Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. and then again from 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. Click on the blue message icon in the bottom right to initiate the chat. And there, right here, you will see the blue icon I am referring to. If you type your question, one of the librarians will type right back to you. While we may not be able to answer all of your questions, we will be able to point you in the right direction. Okay, boys and girls, I will see you online very soon. I hope you enjoyed today's story about Demeter and Persephone.